Hi, everybody. Hello. It's so good to see you today. My name is Danila Blanco Travnicek, and I'm very excited to share with you something that has changed the way I teach, which is the Making Thinking Visible mindset. This is a project, an initiative that was created by Project Zero, but by the Harvard Education School. And once I found this technique, this mindset, this approach to education, I found a way to make my classes much more innovative and to actually help my students think and help my students be global citizens. And to kick off, I would like us to think or to pay attention to this image and think, and create some questions out of this. What do you see here? And I would like you to take a second to actually think what you're seeing. Look for facts. We can see many students. We can see that they are in a school setting. We can see that they are sitting in pairs, that they are all facing the front. We can see that there are 4 students that seem to be presenting. They are in the front. We can see an adult with the screen. We can see a lot of colors, right? So what do you see in this picture? And think of facts. And now let's think of what you think. What can you conclude from this picture? And for example, we can conclude that they are in a class, that the adult there on the left, that might be the teacher, that the 4 students who are presenting in the front, they might be doing a presentation or they might be doing a test. What other things can you think from seeing this picture? And then lastly, let's think, what do you wonder? Let's think of some wonders that you have about this picture. I wonder if these students are paying attention. I wonder if the students in the front are nervous, or how are they feeling? I wonder if the teacher is going to grade them. What else do you wonder? I wonder if they are learning. Are they learning or not? Unfortunately, it's very hard to tell that from this picture. And this, what you have just done, this is a thinking routine. We will make a double click in a couple of seconds of what a thinking routine is, but you have already done one. And I usually do this thinking routine with my students in university to try to help them understand and differentiate what they see, facts, what they think, conclusions, and what they wonder, what questions arise there that might be interesting to realize and acknowledge. And it's very hard to tell from this picture if students are learning or not, right? So what does learning and understanding look like? This is a question that has triggered research and the whole creation of the Project Zero concept. And I would like us to take a second to think in your classes, what does learning and understanding look like? How do you know if a student is actually learning? How does the student know if he or she is learning? And this question triggered, as I mentioned before, a lot of research and studies. And the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University created the Project Zero initiative. And within Project Zero, one of the main concepts, or the most important concept for me at least, the one that has changed the way I teach and I approach education as a whole, is actually the concept of making thinking visible. It's challenging, it is hard, it's not easy, but we can build instruments, we can rely on techniques to make sure that this happens. And this will help us, both teachers and students, better understand what learning is happening. And in the end, what we want is our students to become more, to be more empowered in their daily life, not just in school, right? So making thinking visible is rooted in the concept of multiple intelligences theory. You probably know Howard Gardner and his theory of how human beings are able to learn different things and the different intelligences that we have. We have 7, 8 different types of intelligences, and the most important thing is that we all have those in us. But of course, as we grow up and as we go to school, the way that our family brings us up, and a lot of different factors, those things help some of these intelligences become stronger, and some others are not so developed, for example. So with this concept of multiple intelligences, the Project Zero team came to the conclusion that learning is a consequence of thinking. And this is very interesting for us teachers, right? Because we think that first we need to learn to think, and we need to learn different topics in order to think critically. And learning as a consequence of thinking actually opens the door for different kind of activities that switch maybe the structure or the chronological order of the things that we will ask our students to do. Learning is a consequence of thinking, so we need to prompt our students to think critically. And this brings us to the conclusion that learning and thinking can be made visible. And I really like the tree analogy, because that learning and thinking can be made visible means that we can help this tree grow. We can, plant the seed and then water it until we can see the learning in our students, both the learning and the thinking process. And it's very important for us to understand that we can do this with different activities, with different prompts that we give to our students. But the most important part of making thinking visible is that it serves also our students. It's also a very good tool for our students to understand the way that they learn, how they learn, what have they learned, in which way did they arrive to XYZ conclusion. And making thinking visible is a mindset. And I really like to make like a double click on this idea. It's a mindset that we teachers need to embrace in order to make the thinking and the learning process something that we can see and that we can tangibly, not touch, but identify. And the powers of making thinking visible is that our students can become learners and good thinkers. And it's a way in which they can learn not only in the classroom, but also outside the classroom, and think critically in the classroom, but most importantly, outside of the classroom. So this mindset helps us to foster deep learning, to cultivate engaged students, to change the role of students and teachers, enhance our formative assessment practices, improve learning, and develop thinking dispositions. These are some of the benefits or the powers of making thinking visible, of this approach. And we could do a whole different talk with these topics, but I want to focus on something very important for me, which is how can we be more innovative in our lessons? How can we make the thinking process visible for our students? And for this, I think we have two crucial questions we need to ask ourselves very often. Education systems need to ask this question often. What concepts and skills do students need to know in order to live successfully in this context of complexity? This question talks about content. It talks about topics. It talks about the skills and competencies that we need our students to acquire, to develop, to grow in them. The other question is the how. How can we know, both students and teachers, if the learning process is happening or not? And I find this question very interesting because we don't usually ask this question to ourselves. And this pushes out a little bit outside of our comfort zone and helps us think of the student as an active participant of the process, the learning process. how can we know, both students and teachers, if they are learning or not? And this approach, built by Project Zero, has a set of practices that can help us build and plan and design a culture of thinking. We have different practices: questioning, listening, documenting learnings, and thinking routines. Today, we will focus mainly on thinking routines because this is an instrument that we can actively use and take ownership of so that we can help our students understand what and how they learn and assess, as teacher, assess how and if the learning process is happening. Thinking routines are a set of questions, are a sequence of steps that we can use to scaffold and support students' thinking. These activities have been they have been designed and they have been already tried in students all over the world. So it's very good to have these resources of something that we know that works. Thinking routines really work with students because it helps them think differently, think creatively, think critically about different topics that we need them to start thinking of. And thinking routines help students and teachers see the thinking moves, the strategies that students are using to learn something new. And there are different types of thinking categories. Project Zero lists these different types of thinking categories. And it's very important that you know that thinking routines are not just activities that you will do in your session, in your class, in your lesson. Thinking routines are different instructions that you will need to critically decide when and how to use them. Depending on your goals and depending on what you want your students to learn, to get familiar with, to identify, to explore, then you will choose a different thinking routine. And after this session, I can share with you different resources and a toolkit that Project Zero has created for us educators and facilitators so that we can better understand all the different types of thinking routines that they have created and assess which ones we want to use. And I would like to share with you all a little bit more about how I use thinking routines. This is one of my favorite ones. It's called ESP plus I, which is experiences, struggles, puzzles, and insights. And I use this very often with my university students. I teach in the University of Buenos Aires. And my business students, after a long project that they do throughout the whole semester, we wrap up the project with this thinking routine that asks them to think about the process retrospectively. So, for example, what were some of the experiences that called their attention, that were key for the successful development or design of the project? And this thinking routine is very good for them to start reflecting about the process of what they have just done. We know nowadays that learning happens when we reflect on how we have learned or the strategies that we have used to learn a certain topic or to develop a certain skill. So I recommend this is one of the thinking routines I recommend, ESP plus I, because it helps students reflect on the process and reflect on the learnings. Another thinking routine that is very, very useful, and I use a lot especially when teaching in seminars for teachers, for trainers, for facilitators. I use this thinking routine, which is called making meaning, a lot because it helps not only reflect on a certain concept. In this example, with English teachers, we were talking about deep learning. What does deep learning mean? It does not only help us reflect on the topic, but also connect ideas and think of, okay, what do I know about this topic? What do I think about this topic? And build knowledge together. This is one, for me, personally, I think this is one of the most powerful thinking routines because it helps us connect ideas, think outside of outside of the box or think outside of what we already know about a topic. And there's a great balance between collaboration and individual reflection. Making meaning, I use it a lot for learners who are very much willing to step into their learning process. And for teachers especially, I find it very, very useful and powerful. These are some of the thinking routines that I recommend and that I actively use. But there are so many more. So I encourage you to explore. I can share with you the toolkit afterwards so you can explore all the different thinking routines that you can use in your sessions, in your lessons. However, as I mentioned before, thinking routines are not just activities that you will read and then come to class and improvise on them. Thinking routines are more of a mindset and an approach, and we need to actively and critically choose which thinking routine is the best one to meet my goals. So these are some of the questions I ask myself when I need to choose one thinking routine to use with my students. First of all, what do I want my students to understand? Who are them? How old are them? What kind of topics are they interested in? Where they are in the learning process. Is this the beginning of the year? Is this the end of the year? Where are them in the learning process? Second question I ask myself, what kinds of thinking are needed to engage with and make sense of this content? This is very much connected to the how question. How can we know and students know if learning is taking place? So what kinds of thinking are needed to engage with this content that I want them to learn? And the third question I ask myself is, which routines might best support and scaffold students' thinking? Are they ready to go all in and discuss, debate, or do they need to first get an easy approach and friendly approach to the topic? And answering these questions will help you assess which are the thinking routines that you should be using now. Because it's very easy to get overwhelmed because there are more than 100 or more than 70, 100, about 70 and 100 different thinking routines. So in order not to get overwhelmed, it's great to have these questions, the answers to these questions clear, so that you better know how to assess which thinking routine to take to your students in that class. And to wrap up, I brought here a quote from Vygotsky, one of my favorite researchers in pedagogy. And he said, children grow into the intellectual life of those around them. It's not new that children and learners in general, they grow into the intellectual life of those around them. That's not something that's new. We know that the environment that we can create in the class or in the learning space really makes the difference on how that person learn. So I have a question for us all. Who are our students becoming as thinkers and learners as a result of their time with us? And I would like you to think of this question often. Think about this when you just finish a lesson or when you're planning your next lesson. Who do you want your students to become as thinkers, as learners, as citizens, as leaders, as the result of the time they spend with you? Because we have the power of shaping our students, of helping them learn, understand, and develop skills that are very much needed in today's world. So the different activities and projects and initiatives that we propose to them, they should all build into what we want them to become in the future as thinkers, as learners, and leaders. And I think we have a lot of responsibility. So we need to think carefully about this to make sure that they become empathetic leaders, active listeners, and thinkers that will help solve the different issues and problems that the world faces today. So thank you very, very much. You can reach out to me in my email, in EduStorm. That's my nonprofit organization where we do a lot of different activities, both for students and teachers. We work a lot in English and in Spanish as well, and we approach soft skills development in a very innovative way. So you can feel free to write to us there as well and learn more about what we do. But please write to me if you want to get the toolkit, if you want to get a copy of this presentation. I'm open as well for questions and for discussing all these amazing topics that actually make our teaching different and more innovative. Thank you all very, very much.